Well, good morning, everybody. I hope that you had a wonderful and safe 4th of July. I didn't hear any sirens going off last night, so I hope that we're doing well. Today we're going to have a little bit of a patriotic Sunday. We're going to sing some really cool songs that many of you know and probably have most of the words memorized. And we're going to be talking about freedom today. As we can see, it says the Day of Freedom. But we're going to start off the right way by opening up with the Lord's Prayer. So if you'll all stand with me, please, and we'll say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. You may be seated. Well, welcome everybody. We are here on the 5th of July, and we're having a number of announcements for you today. The Bible study is going on Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock, and I really encourage you you can actually come here to the church, because we're actually holding it in the sanctuary here. And then we're still live streaming it on Facebook, and there's quite a few people who are watching it. We're getting 100 or so views on that. This last week was a challenging one. Admittedly, it was very challenging for us to hear because it challenged our own belief systems and it challenged each of us personally. So I believe that you'll really learn a lot from it and gain quite a bit. We're going to be speaking about, Charles is going to be talking about the Sixth Church. Is that correct, Charles? So which would be Philadelphia. And that will be coming up this Wednesday again at 7 o'clock. Hunter Pickey will be speaking in 2 weeks. He'll be speaking on the 19th, and on that same day will be graduation for our high school graduates. And then a leadership team meeting on Tuesday, not this week, but the following Tuesday in the Church Fellowship Hall. We will be starting to open up the Church Fellowship Hall. We do have a wedding planned for this next month as well, but I believe they're going to be holding their reception at home instead of like here at the church. So still some things that we're doing that we're opening up a little bit more. If you're interested, and we have a video on Facebook that'll kind of tell you some of the things that we're doing a little bit differently for the next 2 months based on how things are going now. Again, everything can change depending on what happens with the virus as it expands or as it contracts throughout our nation. So let's open up in prayer. So Father, I just thank you so much for this time together. I thank you for keeping us safe last night and for all those who had a great night and enjoyed the fellowship time together as they ate together and had fireworks and just spent the time with family and friends. Well, Father, keep them all safe as we continue to deal with this COVID-19 throughout our nation, and Lord, that you'll watch over them. And Lord, we just thank you for everything that you continue to do in our lives. And today, as we talk about the freedom that you give, may we truly worship you and give you glory for all that you have done for us. And we thank you with all of our heart. Amen. Let's start by singing "Oh Beautiful for Spacious Skies, America the Beautiful." So if we'll all stand, please, it's hymn 727. Again, the words will be up on the screen for you.
Mountains, majesty, above the
Again, you can give through our through a check or cash, or you can continue to direct deposit, or you can go to our website and deposit that way. And of course, you can also mail it to the P.O. Box for the church, which is 245 here in Wishick. Let's all sing the doxology together. And again, I want to thank the church for being so faithful during this time with their offerings. It has really helped us a great deal during this very critical time. And I want to again thank you for your faithfulness in doing that. So let's sing the doxology together. A lot of the families have taken the opportunity to use the 3-day weekend and go out and enjoy the lake or take a short trip somewhere. So, but I do have a short children's sermon for you, and it's a lesson about our flag. Now, in a few minutes here, I'm going to show you a video of people who probably don't realize what the flag is all about. I'm not going to completely unfold it, but just enough so you can see what I have here. So here is our flag, and one of the things that a lot of times people don't realize is all the symbolism that is in our flag. Now, why are there 13 stripes? What's the reason? Why is there 13 stripes? 13 colonies, which I'll be talking about today. I'll be talking about our colonies. So then why are there 50 stars? That's our states, right? For every one of the states we have. So if Puerto Rico or Washington, D.C. ever becomes a state, we'll have to find some way of adding more stars. But then also there are 3 colors that were specifically chosen by the founding fathers to represent our country. And interesting, how do we usually say the colors of the flag? How do we usually say it? What's the order? Go ahead and say it out loud.
Red, white, and blue.
Right, we say red, white, and blue, don't we? Okay? Well, I'm going to suggest a change at the very end of the service on how we would reflect upon how we can teach this message about Jesus. So we start with red. It means hardiness and valor. The white means purity and innocence. And the blue stands for vigilance, perseverance, and justice. And so that's the meaning of our flag that we have. And the kids hopefully are taught this in school and what those colors mean and what the stripes are all about. And it teaches them a lot about our history of our country. And so today's lesson, we're actually going to be talking a little bit about that, but we're going to be talking about what is true freedom. And so that's what I want to talk about in just a second here. But first of all, we have some prayer requests. A number of families are suffering loss over the last couple of weeks, and so we want to pray for them. So the Meidinger family, they lost Edgar this last week, did the service this last week, and it was really, you know, when it comes to doing certain funerals, they're not always the most enjoyable things. And although we are missing Edgar, I really enjoyed doing her service because of such a good man he was. I did get to know him before he passed. And I'm going to go ahead and tell the story now because I think it's really important to talk about his character. In the last few months of his life, he was struggling very, very much with his health, to the point where he had become very skinny, and it was very difficult for him to stand up or walk around. I went to go visit him just before this COVID-19 happened, so it must have been around February, early March. And I went to go out to the farm and to visit him, and when I got there, I came in the door, and of course Phyllis met us there, and I said, "Phyllis, it's Pastor Brian." And so I walked in, and as soon as I walked in and said, "Well, hello, Edgar," he stood up and greeted me and shook my hand and then sat back down. And so I thought nothing of it and so forth. But as we talked, we realized how severe his illness had become. So when I got up, I mentioned to him, "Edgar, please, you don't have to stand up. We'll just say goodbye and we'll be on our way." But he insisted on standing up and then walking me to the door. And so when I left, I thought, wow, he's such a good man. And so when I was sitting down with Phyllis and their daughter, and Phyllis reminded me how poor Edgar's eyesight had been over the last couple of years. So he probably didn't recognize me by sight. But when he heard my voice, he immediately stood up. To me, that demonstrated his great respect for people. That even when he was suffering so much and in such poor health, he insisted that he was going to stand to greet me and stand to say goodbye. And that spoke volumes about him. And so I just want you to understand that it was, for me, it was an enjoyable service because I got to really, truly celebrate a man's life and the effect that he had on so many people, and he just was a good man. Also, Daryl Kruger passed away a couple weeks ago, so we're going to pray for that family. We're going to continue to pray for the residents in the Living Center for their safety, and of course, peace for our country. So let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, we just thank you so much. You are so, so good to us. And even in the midst of all the tragedy that's around us, the deaths from the COVID, and all the rioting, yet we know that you still love and care for us. And so we ask you now, as we come before you, to bring comfort and to bring care to the Kruger family and the Meininger family for the loss of someone so important to them. And Lord, that you'll help them through the grieving process and show them that you're right there for them at all times. You're just a prayer away, and that you, Lord, love them deeply. We also pray for our residents at our Living Center to continue to keep them safe as you have throughout this whole time, and that none of them will contract this and they'll remain safe throughout this time. I thank you for that. And Lord, I just thank you for all the things you're doing in our nation, that you're helping us as a church to stay together even though we are small right now and we're still gathering back together slowly. We know that you care for us and you love us so deeply. We thank you with all of our hearts. Amen. Well, if you have your Bibles in your phones, or if you brought one with you, of course, we will probably be adding the pew Bibles and the hymnals by the end of August. Maybe we'll see how things go. But in the meantime, I'll be reading out of John chapter 8, verses 31 through 36. To the Jews who had believed him, Jesus said, "If you hold to my teachings, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." They answered him, "We are Abraham's descendants and have never been slaves of anyone. How can you say that we shall be set free?" Jesus replied, "Very truly I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Now a slave has no permanent place in the family, but a son belongs to it forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed." And so here's this wonderful story that we have of Jesus speaking to the Jews, and they're asking some very important questions. But the question I want to ask us today is this: what can we learn by celebrating the 4th of July? How does celebrating the 4th of July have any importance to us? There's a number of religious groups in our country that do not celebrate it. I believe there's some even nearby that do not celebrate this as a national holiday. In fact, they don't celebrate any national holidays. So how should we as Christians approach this holiday? How should we look towards God and still honor our nation? Personally, I've become a little introspective and a little cynical about some of the certain holidays because it seems like every year the companies try to find ways for it to spend more and more money on the things that are around it. I was just relating to Larry and Jeannie that my kids and their family down in Missouri bought over $1,000 worth of fireworks. And then we go to Christmas time and we spend, and always it seems like we're trying to spend more and more money. And where it's more about the gifts rather than the gift that we receive that day. At Thanksgiving, it's more about eating food and watching football than about spending time with God and thanking Him for His care. When you think of the 4th of July, what are the things that usually come to mind? Well, I already mentioned one of them, fireworks, eating lots of food, getting away. I have a little video here to prove that many Americans no longer know why, the when, or the what.
When the founding fathers signed the Declaration of Independence in 1976, what country did we break away from?
Wait, what?
Hold on, this is just her.
Oh, gosh.
What country did we break away from back in 1976 when the Declaration of Independence was signed?
It's a really good question.
You know, we have a big party, everybody celebrates, it gets drunk, and barbecue.
July, I love that.
But you don't know why we celebrate?
No, it's
China.
China.
We used the Declaration of Independence, we broke
I
away.
knew that. I knew it was China.
When we declared independence from China back in 1776, and Jesse Ventura signed the Declaration of Independence, what year was that?
Oh, God.
Wait, Jesse Ventura signed the Declaration?
Yeah, hold on, just him. Just you and me.
I have no
What
idea.
year was that? The Declaration of Independence signed when we had the Revolutionary War against China.
It's been so long.
So long.
I haven't had to remember that forever.
Who cares about American history and our founding, right?
Now, there was a lot more to that video, but I think it's funny. It's filmed in California, and I believe it was at the Santa Monica Pier. That's what it looks like. Angel and I have been there, so when I saw the background, I'm pretty sure that's where it was filmed. Now, of course, he took just the people who had zero comprehension about. There was probably some that knew the history of the Revolutionary War and so forth, and realized it was not 1976, it was 1776, and that it wasn't China, but Britain instead. And Jesse Ventura did not sign it. But the thing is, the reality was that these people had no clue. Either they had forgotten the history, they never learned it, but for whatever reason, they just didn't know. When Israel fled Egypt nearly 4,000 years ago, they too created a holiday. So like us, we created the 4th of July to celebrate our victory and our breaking away from England. They too created one, and it's called the Passover. Now, not only did they have this great celebration, but they also had a meal called the Seder. And this provides not only the details, but also the reminders of the great work of God that He did in bringing them out of Egypt and to remove them from their tyranny. Now, what concept or lesson what comes to mind when you reflect upon the 4th of July? Well, sometimes when I think about 4th of July, I want to think about no taxation with representation, give me liberty or give me death, Patrick Henry. Or we just talk about the Revolutionary War, how we broke away from England. But I want to focus upon one concept that seems to be at the heart of this holiday, which is freedom. Freedom is something that we see as motivations for much of history. We saw it in the Exodus, we see it in the founding of our country, and we even saw it in the formation of this new country in Seattle called Chuck. Although I heard that it's been shut down. So let's do a little walk through history, and then we will learn together the passage that I pulled out, and we're going to read that in just a little bit. We're going to talk about this idea, this concept of freedom. So here's the context. So here is Israel. They have left their homeland because of a huge famine 400 years prior to the story of the Exodus. They had gone to this land to get away from the famine that was in Israel, and they lived there for 400 years, but during that time they came under the rule of a Pharaoh that did not know about Moses, or did not know about Joseph and Jacob. And they became the slaves to Egypt. So they had this very hard taskmaster that was over them, and they become slaves instead of the welcome guests they were 400 years prior to that. The colonies are very similar. The colonists in North America had fled Europe. They were seeking freedom that would allow them to worship God without any hindrance. And yet they came under the thumb of England over a number of years. So by the early 1770s, they had begun to push back against England. They had become slaves, in a sense, to the needs of England suffering under heavy taxation. England had had a number of wars, one of them being the French Indian War. Just a few years before that, they were still paying taxes on that, paying for that war, and they were putting those taxes upon the people in the colonies. And so that's why the taxation was that representation. But what was Israel and what were the colonies looking for? Well, for Israel, they're looking for this land of promise. Around 1400 BC, Moses, a man that they had known well, appeared out of the desert after being gone for 40 years. He called Israel out of Egypt and to try to go back to their land of promise, their homeland. It would take a number of months and maybe even a year or two before all of those plagues went through and before they left for the land of promise. But then it took another 40 years before they began to take possession of that land. Same with the colonies. In 1776, the colonists began, they started this revolution, although it kind of started maybe a year before that. Men like George Washington and John Adams and Thomas Jefferson and many others declared their independence. However, it would take 5 years of fierce fighting and another 8 years of internal struggle as a nation before they elected their first president, who was George Washington. And that's when they officially became the United States of America. They were looking for a country that would allow them to do their own thing, which is why the states can wield so much power today. If you go to other countries, the country sets the law, and then the provinces and so forth follow it. Here in America, the states have a lot of power they can wield. So what did they get? What was the end result? Their desire was freedom, and this is what they wanted. They wanted to have a land of their own. For Israel, they received a law. And out of the desert, prior to entering the promised land, they received this law, but that law then became the ultimate judge upon them. And their freedom that they were looking for, this promised goal of the promised land, this freedom that they wanted, became lost. And they realized that they had traded one taskmaster for another. They had traded the taskmaster of Egypt for the taskmaster of the law. The colonies also suffered much during the 70s and 80s. And after much work, finally formed the Constitution that we have today. In that time, the Constitution was meant to bring freedom, but slowly over the years, it has become burdensome to us and has in a sense made us a slave to our own country. We are no longer free. And people say, well, I own my own property. Well, that's great until you forget to pay your property taxes. And then you'll know whether or not you really own that piece of land. So what is the heart of the message? What is this message all about? Freedom is not free. There is a heavy price to pay for freedom. To the Jews, they had to fight hard to gain their independence. A whole generation died in the desert, and then thousands died as they tried to liberate the land of promise that was given to them. The colonists had to fight hard for their independence, and thousands died during that time. But think of all of those thousands and hundreds of thousands who have died since to maintain our freedom. In fact, in the United States, we actually now have 2 holidays to celebrate that, 4th of July and Memorial Day. The problem is, and as we just revealed, is the freedom gained during these times that did not result in true freedom. That's what they've all wanted. Throughout history, you hear of all these nations who want freedom and they don't get it. Not the freedom that they're expecting. Because the problem is, when man defines freedom, it is based upon his own terms. It's only based on them. Throughout history, most people have sought freedom and they've determined what it would look like. But they never gain true freedom. It's important to understand this because now as we go into John's Gospel, this is the situation in which they are in. The Jews are in much the situation as the Jews were in Egypt and as the colonists were in the new land. The Jews were seeking out a freedom from Rome. They're looking for a king. The freedom that the colonists sought never brought them true freedom, but rather war and bondage to law. The freedom the rioters expected and Seattle desired only brought them chaos and death. Therefore, as we need to understand what freedom really is. It's not what we decided what freedom is, it's what God decides. So let's look at the context of now where Jesus is at. So here we are in John chapter 8. And Jesus is in the temple of the treasury and he's teaching. So he's teaching these people and he's been teaching for quite a while now. And there are a lot of Jews around him and they had just celebrated the Feast of Booths. Well, that's very interesting because the celebration to remember the travels of the desert. As they had left Egypt, as they traveled through the desert, they lived in tents. And so this Feast of Booths, or Feast of Tabernacles, was to celebrate their time as they were seeking this freedom. Their flight of freedom always was towards this land of promise. Jesus had been spending a great deal of time in chapter 7 defending himself, even declaring that he was the true light, that he was the true Messiah. He even predicted his own death just slightly before the story that we're going to read here in just a second in chapter 8. Through that conversation, many, it says, came to know him. In verse 31, it says, then to the Jews who had believed him, Jesus said these next words. So he's talking to those who believed him. But what we don't know is the nature of the question in verse 33. It says this, we are Abraham's descendants and have never been slaves of anyone. How can you say that we will be set free? So we don't, because we're not there to see it, we only have it in black and white. We don't know the context. Was it meant to be a snide comment? Like, what do you mean? You know what you're talking about. We're not slaves to anybody. Or was it truly those who were saying they believed to say, but Jesus, I thought we weren't slaves. I thought we were free. So we don't understand that context. We have to read through the rest of it to see how Jesus responds to it. It would appear that the conversation, as it continued throughout this whole time, gets more and more adversarial between Jesus and the Jews, the other Jews that were there. Not just those that we believed. But at this question here in verse 33, we don't know the full context. So that's why we have to read on and find out exactly what Jesus is trying to tell us about. Freedom is not a physical reality. It is a human necessity. Now, they thought that they were free, but they were not. Let's get into the passage and discover the true nature of freedom. No one really seeks true freedom. That's what we understand. It says no one seeks after God. No one, not one, in Romans chapter 3. This is what Jesus is saying. We are slaves, and no one's seeking true freedom. They're seeking only the freedom that they want and they desire. We think we're free because we belong to a certain group, share a common history, or we have a set of guidelines that says guarantees us certain unalienable rights. Jesus is going to set them straight. He's going to reveal the true nature of freedom. But only his disciples, and that's what's important. That's why it says he spoke now to his believers. Only his disciples will experience true freedom. Only they will know what is true. So what are the Jews looking for? They're looking for a king. When they realize that Jesus could be this one and they start celebrating, remember on the Palm Sunday, there was thousands of people there and they're laying down palm leaves and they're thinking, here's Jesus coming in, he's going to be our king. He's going to be a king like David. He's going to take over all of our peoples and we're going to be free from the rule of Rome. But again, their idea of freedom was based on what they wanted, not what was truly needed. In verse 31, Jesus says the truth is found in his word. And the truth, the word, is him, not the Bible. See, the context is very clear that Jesus is talking about himself. He's not saying the Bible is the salvation. He's saying he is the salvation. Now, yes, the Bible does reveal that truth. That's why we have it. But our vision statement in our own church says that in John 14:6 says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And no one comes to the Father except through me, through Jesus. This is the truth. Freedom is not some physical reality. It's not gaining a new land. It's not having a law that allows us to be able to do what we want. It lies in the person of Jesus Christ. So Jesus focused upon the truth first, that he is the Word, and he will set them free. Now, true freedom is not gained by force. In all the other times that we've talked about, it's always been gained by force. Freedom is gained, true freedom is gained by sacrifice. This is why in verses 21 through 30, just before this verse, Jesus speaks about his sacrifice. And it was then that many believed. In verse 30, it says this. I'll start in 29. The one who sent me is with me, and he has not left me alone, for I always do what pleases him. He's talking about the Father, of course. Even as he spoke, many believed in him. And in the very next verse, he says, to the Jews that believed him, Jesus said this. If you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So the truth, he is the truth. He's the one that will set us free. So he continues to address so he's addressing the true believers. Understand that. He's addressing us. He's not addressing the Jews who do not believe. Because they don't understand this. They have not experienced that truth. They have not experienced that true freedom. So what did they get? They got a Savior. That's what they really needed. The Jews needed a Savior. They didn't need another king like in the manner of David. They didn't need to be released from the rule of Rome to have, again, their own form of freedom. Instead, they needed a Savior. So true freedom is not gained by force. It's gained by sacrifice. And in essence, Jesus repeats that truth found in 31 by saying this in verse 36. He says, "So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed." You see, only the Son. So at this time, the people are very angry. It says right afterward, "I know that you are Abraham's descendants, yet you are looking for a way to kill me, because you have no room for my word. I am telling you what I have seen in the Father's presence, and you are doing what you have heard from your father." And they said, "Wait a minute, Abraham is our father." And he said, "If you were Abraham's children, then you would do what Abraham did. As it is, you are looking for a way to kill me, a man who has told you the truth, that I heard from God, and Abraham did not do such things. You are doing the works of your own father." And of course, he's referring to Satan at that time. Jesus is the truth. It's through his sacrifice that we gain freedom. So we're going to sing this song. So if everyone stand, we're going to sing this song, "My eyes have seen the glory, the coming of the Lord." You see, the results of this message and what this message is all about has been this: to live as sons and daughters of the true King and not as slaves to a horrible taskmaster. The Jews thought they were free because they were of the line of Abraham. The colonists thought that they were free because they had created a constitution that guaranteed these rights. The reality is we have a horrible taskmaster. It is sin. In verses 34 and 35, Jesus says that we are slaves to sin and therefore not free in any sense of the word. So when we think about the 4th of July, recognize the sacrifice of the many to gain us the independence from England, but then stop and remember the work of Christ and who gave us true freedom. Now, normally we refer to our flag as the red, white, and blue. But I want to change the order just a bit. White, purity and innocence. Jesus was the only pure man, the only man that was truly innocent and never sinned. Red, it was his blood shed for us on Calvary that brings us true freedom, a freedom that he defines and he provides. And lastly, blue, a heavenly color that reminds us that our kingdom is not of this world, but awaits us in the future when we gather together in the presence of our King. So what is your favorite holiday? And what does it teach you? For me, it's Thanksgiving, because I just love and appreciate celebrating the faithfulness of God in my life. But we're going to have communion now together. And I think it's very appropriate that we do it today, because it does celebrate the freedom that Christ gives us through his sacrifice only. And so for those who have received one already, if you have not received them, just raise your hand. I think everyone's received one already. Okay, I think so. Great. Okay. So if you'll go ahead and hold this in your hand. Now, the way to do this is there's 2 layers of this. This is the first time we've ever used these. So on the very top, there's a plastic part, and then there's a cardboard part. So just take the plastic part off slowly and carefully, and it will reveal the wafer. And we're going to do the wafer first. So I'm going to read again out of Corinthians chapter 11, 1 Corinthians chapter 11. And we're going to be talking about the Lord's Supper. So Paul again is instructing the Corinthians. They had kind of started to abuse this very important celebration about the sacrifice of Jesus. And so he says, and so then when you come together, it is not the Lord's Supper that you eat. For when you are eating, some of you go ahead with your own private suppers. As a result, one person remains hungry and another gets drunk. Don't you have homes to eat and drink in? Or do you despise the church of God by humiliating those who have nothing? What shall I say to you? Shall I praise you? Certainly not in this manner. For I received of the Lord, you'll take the wafer. As I have passed on to you, the Lord Jesus Christ said this on the night he was betrayed. He took the bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." So, Father, we thank you so much for your sacrifice that brings us true freedom that only you can do. And we take of this now in remembrance of that. And help us always to remember never to take this lightly, but truly believe and understand. Thank you, Father. Take it together. And now to open up the other one, I would suggest that you not hold it over your lap, hold it off to the side, and go ahead and pull slowly on that cardboard piece, and the juice will be revealed by that. So just pull it nice and slow, and that way you won't spill it on yourself, because I know, like myself, I'm wearing white pants, and I would not want to ruin my white pants. In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink of it in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." So, Father, we take this together. When we see the color of this juice and realize that it's the red, the blood that you shed, I hope that it brings to remembrance the work that you did, the sacrifice, and that we'll recognize that our freedom was gained because of your sacrifice. No other way could it have been done. I am so grateful that you did it for me. So when I take of this, Father, I pray that I will never forget the lessons that you teach through this symbol, and that you will be glorified in it. In your most holy name we pray. Let's all take together. You may just take these now and put them in the little hole, the cup holders there. and they'll come around later to pick them up. And so Jesus has said to them, he was speaking to the believers, but these other Jews were there as well, and he said that they tried to kill him. But let's remember, this message is for the believers. The truth is your freedom is gained through his sacrifice. The truth is that it is only through him that we have true freedom. So we may celebrate freedom in America on 4th of July. The reality is the only true freedom that is ever gained was through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. So let's stand together and let's sing this last song together, My Country 'Tis of Thee. And we'll close with our song. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. Give you true freedom. God bless you all. Have a great day, and I hope that you enjoy the following week. And look forward to seeing you again next week. Bye-bye.